Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to today's AIAA Los Angeles special event. Today is the holiday, the Juneteenth. Very happy holiday, so we'll have a great celebration today with great talks and a great panelists, a great discussion. So this is our agenda for today. So we have five minutes for AIAA introduction, then 5 minutes from Mr. Shelby Jacobs for the introducing the special message from Representative Levin. Then Mr. Harvey Hawks is going to give a great talk for the Tuskegee Airmen. And that part is not going to be recorded, but the rest part will. And okay, I just a few words. I was chatting with Harvey, Mr. Hawks, saying this Tuskegee Airman has great influence on the society and even the media, sci-fi. And this is Battlestar Galactica in 1978 and 1980. So you can see a lot of African-American pilots and heroes in this TV mega shows. You can see Colonel Ty and also Lieutenant Boomer is very, very popular. They're like TV heroes. And you can see on the lower left, they even have, they also have the African American players, hero in their Council of 12. So it's I love this TV show so much. It is great sci-fi. So let's first thank AIAA headquarters. They kindly provide this wonderful platform of Zoom. So really appreciate. And right now this session is recorded, but not for the presentation by Mr. Hawks. And if any issue with the audio, please use the phone to dial in as the audio connection. You will solve the issue of the internet bandwidth. If you have any question, please type in the chat box. Type in the Q&A box, and you can interact with each other through the chat box. And just a few words for the local area of Los Angeles and Las Vegas. You all know this area is heavily aerospace populated with many great activity from James Webb Space Telescope, JPL, SpaceX, Virgin Galactic Aerospace Corporation, and many others. And we have new company setting up like Launcher and Relativity Space, those things, and many great student branches doing good jobs. We constantly have the event to keep everybody network each other and have fun. We also have newsletter opportunity. So please share your articles or even photography. We also have video on the YouTube channel and our website. We also have podcast, gallery, member spotlight. I have encouraging people like Dr. Christiana Tyler and all the great members, to be on our spotlight. And Engage is a great platform. Once you become a member, you can start to chat with people. Many benefits for the AIAA member: the daily launch, great news, insider story, Aerospace America, and you save a lot for attending AIAA national conferences. Student member, if you can stay as a professional, there's a great transition rate. It's really a great advantage you should take. And many different level of AIAA members. Right now, our section chair is Dr. Jeffrey Bushell from Raytheon. He's a fellow of AIAA. And a couple of people, for example, Elon Musk, Miss George Whiteside, they are our associate member. So I'll go a little bit, jump a little bit. Great STEM outreach, national conferences. And I want to point out this slide because Tracy could not be with us today. She was with us last year. She's a little bit right now. She want to say hello to everyone. She did give a talk on Juno and or Europa Clipper, and it was exciting. So I wish she can join us next time. There's a recent picture from Juno on Ganymede. It's related to Tracy's work. So I'll jump a little bit. Oh, this one upper left is our current section chair, Dr. Jack Pushell. Some of you might knew him from work or from previous AIAA engagement. Okay. So I move forward. This is just a happy hour 2 days ago. It was fun. And middle school students show her computer design. And we have attendee sharing the Mars photos. Everybody just have great fun. And we are chatting, what's the first thing we want to do if we go to Mars? No. Okay, so let me introduce Mr. Shelby Jacobs. He will introduce the video from Congress. So Mr. Shelby Jacobs is a former Apollo engineer. He worked with NASA prime contractor, Rockwell, and is now part of Boeing. Later in the panel session, we'll show a video or two, and he's highly decorated. He even honored by the Congress. So it's our great pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Shelby Jacobs. And after his introduction for the Congress 11th video, we'll introduce the speaker, Mr. Hawks. So Shelby is yours. Mr. Jack, you need to, yeah, okay.
Okay, I'm happy to be here with you on this first national Juneteenth holiday. I'm a Texas transplant, came here to California as a youngster, but I've always been aware of this holiday. So this is a special meaning to me in addition to the Tuskegee Airmen connection, which I have arrived at here in Oceanside by virtue of meeting one of the gentlemen, Alfonso Harris, who at the induction of Bob Mitchell in terms of naming the Oceanside airport. And I'm especially pleased that my congressman has consented, and in view of the fact that he couldn't be here, he consented to present us with a video outlining Oceanside and our connection with the Tuskegee Airmen and Bob Maxwell being named on his behalf. So with that, I just want to turn you over to the congressman, and we thank him for his support.
Hello, I'm Mike Levin, Congressman for North County, San Diego, and South Orange County, and I want to start by acknowledging the incredibly brave service of our groundbreaking military and civil rights heroes, Tuskegee Airmen. These aviators answered the call of duty with such poise and dedication through adversity that they've become immortalized in American history as shining examples of national heroes. In my own district, we're proud to honor the late Bob Maxwell, a Tuskegee Airman and Oceanside resident, who, in addition to honorably serving his country during a time of segregation and blatant institutional discrimination, fought to save the Oceanside Municipal Airport from closure. In recognition of his valiant life of service for both his country and his local community, the airport has been renamed the Bob Maxwell Memorial Airport. The spirit of perseverance and tenacity that characterized Bob's persona is the same spirit that coursed through the veins of all our brave Tuskegee Airmen. Indeed, it's the same spirit that spurred civil rights activists throughout our nation's history to work tirelessly in the pursuit of equality. And so in the month of June, as we celebrate Juneteenth and continue marching on the long road toward equality, we honor the heroes of yesterday and the professionals of today who continue the charge. Our African-American aerospace professionals carry this spirit today. In a demanding profession where the Black community is still underrepresented, these leaders, many of whom are with us today, continue to pave the way for the next generation. I'm grateful for your service to our communities. Thanks for allowing me a moment to speak at your event. Please don't hesitate to reach out if my office can be of service.
Great for Congressman Levin, and great thanks to Mr. Shelby Jacobs. We'll hear more from him in a panel session. So our speaker today, Mr. Harvey Hawks, is a historian for the St. Bruce chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated. He's a docent of the Museum Pride. He's also the tour guide and educator. He's formerly with Boeing commercial airplane weight and balance analysis on SST, B747, Boeing 767 programs, and formerly with U.S. Army Missile Office, also with General Dynamics in Pomona. He also worked on aircraft structural design on DC-10 and DCA at Douglas Aircraft Long Beach. He lives in Bellevue, Washington, and is currently a docent, as mentioned. He's also the historian for the St. Bruce chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated. He earned his Bachelor of Science degree in aerospace engineering from Tri-State University, Angola, Indiana, and a professional engineering license from Washington State. He worked in the U.S. Army Missile Project Office, General Dynamics, Pomona, aircraft structural design on DC-10 and DCA, and Douglas Aircraft Long Beach. Then he worked on the Boeing commercial airplane, as mentioned previously. He spent 15 years until retirement in 1995 as customer engineer, coordinating foreign airline accounts, including British Airways, South China, Air Zimbabwe, and Air 2000. Harvey has a strong interest in all aspects of aviation. Other hobbies include bowling, golf, sports car, Corvette owner, airplanes, private pilot. That's wonderful. Travel and grandparenting. Oh, that's really happy. He's active in the community of Christ Church as a lay minister and a teacher. Along with his wife, Ada, he raised 3 children and has 11 grandchildren. Wow, that's wonderful. So let's welcome Mr. Harvey Hawks.
Hey, thank you very much, Ken. Let me go into my screen sharing. Let's see.
Discussion. So let me show up this. So we have a group of wonderful distinguished panelists, and our moderator today is Dr. Christiana Taylor. He's the founder and the CEO of Intelligent Space. She's actually my predecessor. She's formerly the AIAA Los Angeles Las Vegas section events program chair. She was doing exactly what I'm doing at that time. So really appreciate the foundation she paved. I really highly appreciate it. Unfortunately, we just received the bio from Mr. Wallace and Mr. Shelby Jacobs. But the other gentlemen and the ladies, so they can, Christiana will help introduce or ask them to self-introduce. So let's welcome Dr. Christiana Taylor.
Good morning, everyone. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Mr. Hawk, for this wonderful presentation. I really, truly appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone else does as well. Before I start, I want to just take a moment to recognize what day it is. So today is June 19th, celebrated as Juneteenth. Congress just enacted that Juneteenth will now be a federal holiday. But I think that we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we didn't just take a moment to recognize what Juneteenth is and just take a moment of silence for that. So I'm going to first very quickly explain Juneteenth, and then I just like to take 10 seconds of silence just to respect what that is. And then I'm going to go in and have my panelists self-introduce themselves. But first, just again, I wanted to take a moment to say that this conversation about the Tuskegee Airmen is extremely important because a lot of people don't learn about this growing up. And because people don't learn about this, they don't learn about Juneteenth, they don't learn about what the Tuskegee Airmen do, and they don't see themselves represented, for that matter, is where they can show themselves. So first, conversation about Juneteenth. It's a holiday that is celebrated to commemorate the emancipation of enslaved people in the US. So slavery actually ended in 1862, but it wasn't until June 19th, 1865, so 3 years later, that slaves were actually declared free in Texas. So people were free for 3 years and didn't know it. So Juneteenth is a holiday that is recognized, well, now federally, but my understanding is that it started in Texas as a way to recognize the fact that that was when enslaved people in Texas found out that, hey, you are no longer slaves, you have rights. Now, obviously the conversation we just heard, segregation, Jim Crow, all the way to modern day racism situations that are going on, everything from the George Floyd's protests, the Breonna Taylor situation from last year. Obviously, there's still room to grow and improvements to be had, but I just want to take 10 seconds of silence to recognize Juneteenth as what it represents, as well as before I start this conversation. So just taking 10 seconds of silence right now. Okay, thank you so much for allowing me to recognize what day we're speaking about this. First of all, I want to say thank you so much, Mr. Hawks, for your presentation. I think that it's lovely always to hear a little bit more about the Tuskegee Airmen. Just to give the people some more context on myself, my undergrad degree is actually in aircraft. So I did my internships at GE Aircraft. Well, I don't know what it's called now. It turned into GE Transportation afterwards, and I think it might be GE Aviation. Basically, I worked with plane engines for my internship during undergrad. So it's always interesting to go and look at some of the historical planes that people flew back in the day. And then my dad was actually an Army Ranger, and I assure you, you'll never not hear my dad talk about being an Army Ranger. So I have a huge respect for the military, as well as growing up hearing about basically Black representation in the military. So I'm very lucky in that perspective because I heard about it. I think there's quite a few points that you brought up during the conversation that I definitely want to kind of throw to the panelists. And just to give the panelists the idea, I kind of have this in three different sections. One, the historical significance of kind of the conversation that Mr. Hawks presented. Two, some of the media representation that, one, they inspired, and that conversation is still going on today. Most recently to me, the conversation that happened in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier about a Black man becoming Captain America and what that means to carry the stars and stripes, and especially how that conflict, when you talk about segregation, after the fact of the service they provided. And then last but not least, kind of the aircraft and aerospace industry, their part in this, because there's definitely, especially being in LA, there's a huge history of aircraft and aerospace, and obviously our panelists are part of that right now, that provide that. So first, let me start with my wonderful panel. Mr. Hawks, we just heard from you, so I'm going to go to Mike Wallace. You just give about 30 seconds of introduction yourself. I think everyone would love to hear a little bit more about you, so please, Mike.
Well, first of all, thank you guys for inviting me to, share with any kind of knowledge I can, especially on this day, a very monumental day, as you just mentioned. It commemorates basically the freedom that it was told late. And I don't want to kind of reiterate what you basically said there, but I got 30 seconds, so I'll talk more later. But the main thing about myself is, I currently work for Raytheon, been with Raytheon for 3 years, but I got over 35 years in the aerospace industry. And I was influenced through the Air Force because I was an Air Force. I'm a veteran, so that actually helped my career, propel my career off. So this was a great segue to talk about the Tuskegee Airmen and where we are today, talking about the plight of African Americans and now Juneteenth, which is you celebrate on June 19th. So we'll talk more about me. You can read the bio, but that's just a little bit right now. I'll pass it on. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to give you only 30 seconds. You have such an interesting history. So please don't think I assure you we want to hear more. So
there's going to be probably more questions, I'm sure, and I'll be able to answer and talk about it. Okay.
Mr. Shelby, would you like to go next? I think that I really enjoyed hearing from you on the last panel we were on, but I'd love to give you a moment. I believe you have some videos as well. So I'd like to, if you'd like to present yourself next, I'd really appreciate it.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Perfect.
I was under the impression that they were going to show the videos, but
they are in one moment. But if you would just like to introduce yourself.
Okay. While they're doing, I just want to express my gratitude for being here on this day. It's very special to me in many ways. My connection with Tuskegee Airmen, being a native from Texas, the Juneteenth has been a part of my life. And I'm glad to see it nationalized from localized celebrations throughout my life. I'm glad to see it expand. A lot of states are now nationally. And so I have a soft spot in my heart for the celebration of the day, the Tuskegee Airmen and the Tuskegee Airmen and their contributions to paving the way. Go ahead.
My name is Shelby Jacobs. I was born April 27th, 1935 in Dallas, Texas. Migrated to California as an 8-year-old. I was accustomed to the segregation in terms of housing and schooling and everything. As a matter of fact, I had to walk by a white school and a Mexican school en route to the black school. And as I progressed through high school, being an honor student and a 4-year athlete and class president, when my principal of the school found out that I had chosen engineering, he said, "Shelby, there are no black engineers. I recommend you take a trade." I responded to that by not saying anything to him. It didn't anger me. It was my first moment of what I consider divine intervention. I considered that he was telling me that the odds would be great, and I was willing to accept that challenge. And I wanted to pursue something that they said couldn't be done, in spite of the fact that that may be true. I wanted to prepare myself in case the doors ever opened, and they did. But my motivation was continually stimulated by the low expectations of people in general. They did not perceive that we could do things on the same basis, much as they had gone through in athletics and other things. We were kept out of a lot of things, presumed we couldn't do it. And in this arena, I was committed to proving, contrary to the assumption that we were not capable, we're inferior of doing these things, and that was a constant motivator. Growing up in areas remote, I was totally unaware of NASA. And when I got involved in pursuing engineering based on academic excellence, I didn't have a clue what NASA was. Even when I started to work for North American, which became Rockwell, I didn't know they were contracted to NASA. That evolved afterwards. So I was kind of like a career chosen in the dark, truly blind faith. I hadn't a clue that I could be that. In fact, I was told that there were no black engineers, but I pursued it in spite of that. The technology that I was responsible for designing was a camera system that was provided, the cameras themselves were provided to us by NASA from prior programs. And I got the assignment to adapt that system to the Apollo, which was the most powerful vehicle we had ever undertaken, to make sure that the cameras would endure the environment in order to capture the film that were required to prove that the separation was in fact valid. The results of my work of installing these cameras on the Saturn, which was the second stage of the Apollo, was the iconic photos that we see of the interstage separating and tumbling away in the distance, which was visual evidence that in fact it did not contact or in any way disturb the vehicle. But what you see is the iconic photograph of the Earth's curvature, and it kind of led to the resolution to the Earth is flat versus the Earth is round. I remember back sometime during Cesar Chavez where the phrase "si se puede." Well, I was one of those, it can be done, long before that became a coined phrase. I was practicing that from the 1950s. I'm a strong proponent of equality to the nth degree. Whatever you can do should be permitted to do that. As a female or as anybody else, there should be no distinctions prejudicing your skills or your career path.
Well, thank you so much for that great introduction. I think we definitely have some really good questions already coming up. Next up.
Question, actually, there's another one.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, sorry for that.
No problem, please.
Just give me 1 second.
No problem. Mr. Shelby, your presentation has a great comment in there where you're saying, I just wanted to do it. And I think that reminds me of what Mr. Hawk said, where someone was saying, I just want to fly. It's like, you don't know that you're great when you're being great. You just kind of are, and history reminds you.
Thank you.
Just
There we go. Maybe.
somehow it's not playing. Just give me 1 second. I changed to another browser.
No problem, no problem. I think our panelist is patient.
I'm wearing the shirt representing what we are here for, the celebration of the 50th anniversary. That's fantastic to be able to be alive. Many of my friends didn't live to see this. Yeah. So that's a blessing in and of itself to survive, to be a part of this celebration.
Talk to us about what it was like leading up to the event, leading up to the moon landing? What was the mood around NASA like with you and your fellow engineers?
I actually work for a NASA contractor,
Okay.
Rockwell, but the mood in my area was a continuum of activity for many, many years. I started working on rocket propulsions in the mid-50s, long before the Apollo was even committed or the Saturn program.
Wow.
So this was an evolution of a long series of activities for me. The culmination of it was Apollo 11. I had been working on Apollos from 1 through 17, and the propulsion system that provided the power to get into space. That was my specialty. The camera system was a unique exception to what I normally did, and it's that occurred actually on Apollo 6. It was one of the 2 flights which occurred on the same day that Martin Luther King was assassinated, April the 4th, 1968. So my career had a parallel professional component and a social component of civil advantages that I was getting.
Sure.
To the point where I mentioned them when I did the work that I'm known for in Downey, and now I have an exhibit there. I could not live in Downey until fairly recently. So I was afflicted with a dual career in terms of demonstrating that I could do this while our social environment was kind of bringing up the rear.
It wasn't an easy work environment, clearly.
It was a difficult environment because I was literally taking the job of an Anglo for all my career. Every job I had not been done by a black before, so they were unaccustomed to people doing those roles. I mean, sweeping the floor and taking out the trash, they understood that.
Right.
Yeah.
But that was unique, and that was the burden of a pioneer. You carry those things with you. You cannot just throw that off and ignore it, because it'll smack you in the face and it can do harm to you if you're not aware. But to insulate yourself from the impact of those kinds of things was part of my. So this was a culmination and the confirmation of all that had gone on prior, and my career went on some 25 years after that on the shuttle program.
Mr. Jacobs, I wanted to ask you, so you are a rocket scientist back in the day, involved specifically in the Apollo 11 program. Now, as you mentioned, I want you to explain to San Diegans the camera system that you were involved in that was so instrumental in Apollo 11, and how that today, I mean, that alone made history. The images. Talk to us about that.
Yes, it did. And the issue we had with that was that NASA had tasked Rockwell and a team of engineers to do analysis and tests. We had been doing analysis and tests for a couple of years to prove that the stages of the vehicle would separate without imploding, because they were being subjected to an environment beyond which they were originally built. So this is the Apollo shuttle and Saturn was the most powerful vehicle ever built. So we had to make sure the camera would survive the environment in order to take the film. So we had years to prove that, and finally NASA, in essence, said to us, "Show me." And so we put the cameras in to show and to confirm the separation system was a viable system. And that took place a year or so before we committed to Apollo 11.
So we knew it worked, and the image, for the first time, the whole world saw the curvature of the Earth.
That's correct. We had never flown that high and taken pictures, even though that was not our primary purpose. That was a byproduct of proving that separation took place, was to see the Earth curvature. And that is what made it iconic. And of all the things I did in 40 years, it survived to be the most significant thing that I ever did. And I would have disagreed with that if you'd asked me what I should identify as my career. Well, the film itself became iconic.
It's amazing.
And it had a life of its own, and so I adapted to that rather than other things.
And Shelby, in the short time that we have left, talk to us about what it was like for you to watch them set foot on the moon after all of those years of hard work. And you were a part of that. What was it like for you to watch that?
It was just euphoria. I mean, I was really excited. I didn't get a chance to see it in real time because it happened on back east, and but it was the culmination of a series of events that finally said you could have a sigh of a moment of just can't even express it.
Yeah.
But that was like just the beginning for me. My career, 30 years beyond that,
Sure.
I was still going. So it was a highlight that demonstrated that yes, it can be done. I can do it. Other people of color and women can do it. That's what it meant to me, which was much more significant than the event itself.
Wow.
Yeah, you are a true pioneer. That is
A hero.
absolutely,
A hero
absolutely,
for
Shelby.
sure.
I'm glad to wear that badge.
And we are so glad that you are a San Diego.
Yes.
I mean, for us, that's even, you know, you live here in the North County area with your family, your lovely wife behind the cameras right now.
Well, that's great. I
Elizabeth,
retired here by choice. Prior to that, I couldn't choose where I lived.
That's right. That's right.
true.
All right, Shelby Jacobs, thank you so much. Great to see you again.
Thank you very much.
God bless.
It's my pleasure.
Well, thank you very much. We'll definitely look forward to asking a few questions as we move forward. My next panelist is Mr. Frederick Beck. He is a retired Air Force Major and current section manager for cyber and ICAM engineering and ops at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Mr. Beck, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right, thank you, Dr. Taylor. Thanks everyone for having me aboard this morning or this afternoon, as it would be now. I appreciate the opportunity to sit in such esteemed company. Growing up in a small town in Southeast Alabama or what have you, I always heard of Tuskegee Institute or whatever, and it was like historically a school that everyone kind of aspired to go to or what have you, just because of the fact of all of its heritage. But seldom was it ever referenced in terms in my little town or what have you, talking about the significance of Tuskegee Airmen. And so that in and of itself or whatever, I would have driven me or what have you to aspire to do those same type of things. And I think I ended up having a career that kind of circled the outskirts of that significant activity that was going on there, but still I end up eventually joining the Air Force, serving in the enlisted corps, and then getting my commission halfway through my service there and spending 22 years in the Air Force, in which time I did a list of things. I traveled the world and seen and had a ton of experiences. And now I find myself working with NASA, Mr. Jacobs setting a way for those significant activities where I'm leading up the engineering portion and operations for cybersecurity and ICAM, which is identity, credentials, and access management. And so I've been at JPL now for 7 years and continuing my career there, looking to continue to earn the right to be on the stage with my colleagues here, and also being able to contribute to what Blacks are doing in society as a whole. So I appreciate that this morning or this afternoon, excuse me.
Well, thank you for your service. I definitely have a few questions. I find it interesting that our panel is from all over the place. So I want everyone to start stewing on my first question is, did you hear about the Tuskegee Airmen before this? Just because I think sometimes it is taught, sometimes it's not taught, and sometimes it's taught incorrectly. So just start stewing on that question as we go into this. But first, my next panelist is Mrs. Karen Robinson. She is the president of the Sam Bruce chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen in Seattle, Washington, and she's also the daughter of the Lieutenant Colonel Leroy Roberts Jr., who was actually a Tuskegee Airman. So if you'd like to introduce yourself quickly, Mrs. Robinson, I'm sure we'd love to hear you. And so thank you so much for joining us today. You're muted if you're speaking right now. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Am I?
Yeah, and I can hear you. Perfect.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. This is such an honorable panel that you have here. I'm just enthralled by everyone's credentials and everything. My dad was a Tuskegee Airman, and when I was growing up, no one knew about them. I did, because I heard his stories, and a lot of his friends, they would tell stories about what they did in the war, but no one else seemed to know about it. They all knew that Daddy was oh, there I am. The daddy was like a supply officer or whatever when he ran the one out here at McCord Air Force Base in Washington State. But they didn't know anything about him being a pilot or a fighter pilot. So now that they're honored through the people knew about them through the movies, people started learning about them and wanting to know more and more about their history, and so that we were able to talk about them. I have a ton of stories that Daddy told me about what happened when he was, in the Air Force, and things that happened to him during his tenure at Ramatelli Air Force Base in Italy, where he ran, where he did a lot of his missions over to Poland and to Austria and places like that, and fighting. And also he did say that the reason why he did it, because a lot of times people say, well, why did you do it? The United States is not, they don't like Black people. We're still segregated. He said, because of the promise that the United States has as being the greatest country in the world. This is the greatest country we'll ever have. And he says, it's a promise for you to be what you can be. They knew that they tried to get things going as far as integration. But we knew that they started a lot of things. So I'm just very proud to be here, and also the legacy that my dad and the other men paved the way for. So thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's obviously an honor to have someone who's directly a part of that legacy. I think everyone else gets to learn about that legacy, but you are actually living, not just participating, but living family members. So thank you so much for joining us today. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
My next panelist is Mr. Gary Moore. I hope I said that correctly. Would you mind taking about 30 seconds to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yes, I'm Gary Moyer. I graduated in 1966 and started working in the Apollo program for the first 2 years. That included a lot of the work in recovery from the 1967 pad fire, including the hatches and the forward structure and recovery systems. From there on, I went on to time later. Well, I went to Lockheed, and then I went to TRW, and I worked on the lunar module descent engine a little bit in its secondary use as a booster second stage engine. Along about that time, I also got involved in what we call the Wright Flyer project. And that's a project to build a replica of the original airplane. And I think I can't see my own screen right now, but I think if you have the screen, that you may be able to see the Wright Flyer that we built, the second Wright Flyer we built behind me at the moment. So anyway, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics built a Wright Flyer in 1953, and that was in the San Diego Air and Space Museum fire in about 1980. And after that, there we go. And after that, the members got together and decided to build a replica of the airplane, another replica. Here's the 1953 flyer. And so I got cornered into that in about 1980. It was gone for about 10 years because I didn't think we'd ever finish the airplane. But we built a replica that was a wind tunnel model, and it was installed in the NASA Ames wind tunnel in 93 and 99. And then we started working on this airplane, which is a flyable version. Anyway, when we started working on this aircraft, we were at the Northrop facility in Hawthorne Airport. And after that, we would go for lunch over to Nat's Cafe, Crenshaw and just south of the airport. And once or twice a month, there would be about a half a dozen Tuskegee Airmen that would come in. And that's my weak excuse for getting into this panel.
Well, thank you
So
so much.
anyway, we would talk to them, and whenever they were there, we would give them the honor of the corner table. I see that our then chairman just arrived at the hangar here too. But anyway, that's the brief introduction. a little more than brief.
Thank you so much for the introduction. It's lovely to actually see some of the planes. One of the things that I was saying is that there's a huge history of aircraft and space in particular in Southern California. And so it's lovely to not only be able to see this, and I wanted to bring this up later on, but just even understanding that the B-52, B-51, P-51 Thunderbird was actually made in Inglewood. So, you know, that's literally the plane that they were flying as to see, and that was literally made in Inglewood, just like Mr. Shelby's presentation talked about how Downey was so integral to a part of the Apollo program. So there's such a long history of aerospace and aircraft, not only Black history, but like aircraft and aerospace history in Southern California that kind of permeates through all of us. I believe I have two more panelists, so I want to go very quickly because I do have a few questions. First, I have Dr. Barbara Shannon. Would she like to introduce herself? Dr. Shannon, can you hear me?
I'm sorry. Were you talking to me perchance?
No, I heard you. That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, good.
All right. Dr. Shannon may or may not be here, but hear me. So, is Victor Cook here? Okay. All right. I'm going to pose my first question, and that has to do with the representation of Tuskegee Airmen. If you could say, Gary, would you mind muting yourself very quickly? My first question for everyone was, oh, there you are, sorry. Before I start, I'd like to give a moment to Victor Cook. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah, I was supposed to be a panelist, I don't think, but yeah, my name is Victor Cook. Right now I'm residing in Texas. I work for Lockheed Martin Company. And I started out right there in Southern California too. That's where you guys are located. I went through the whole aerospace industry thing from ROTC through the Air Force and back out to the Boeing, not what is the Boeing company. And so I wasn't prepared to speak today, but I've been listening. I was interested in what Mr. Hawks was talking about because we still have a virtual flying team online. The 99th, well, it's the 332nd, but we 99th Fighter Group, virtual flying group, simulator flying.
Well,
so go ahead. I wasn't prepared to speak, but go ahead.
My apology, but thank you so much for your service, and thank you for introducing yourself. I think it's really important that we get a mixture of the people that are presenting, and especially since there are so many lives of the Tuskegee Airmen touch. So thank you so much. Dr. Barbara Shannon, I'd love to hear from you if you'd like to introduce yourself very quickly.
Good afternoon, everyone, distinguished panelists. I'm not a panelist. As a matter of fact, I'm an educator, and I'm involved with AIAA. Both of my uncles, though, worked in the aerospace industry. They were involved in, they worked in the Downey area. They worked out of El Segundo. They've been gone a few years though now. And I had an uncle who was in the US Navy. And so I just wanted to hear what everyone had to say. I've been fortunate to, one of the last Tuskegee Airmen came and spoke at a school where I was a teacher. So that was really great for the students that were involved. So that's who I am.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself. So my first question to everyone is, where are you from? And when was the first time you heard about the Tuskegee Airmen? So I'm from Chicago. I grew up born and raised in Chicago, but I heard about the Tuskegee Airmen mostly because my dad was an Army Ranger. So my dad was into military stories, military history. So I very much heard about the Tuskegee Airmen growing up. But one, I mean, just from the presentation, I guess I didn't realize the Tuskegee Airmen weren't necessarily from Tuskegee. I thought, and excuse my ignorance, they're from Tuskegee, right? Like, you're from Alabama. So I thought they were all from Alabama, which, I mean, rethinking that, obviously the military comes from all over the place. So it's lovely to hear, you know, oh, there's representation from other places. But in my head, the Tuskegee Airmen are all from Alabama because that's where Tuskegee is. And that's just what it is. But my question is, my question stands, where are you from and when was the first time you heard of the Tuskegee Airmen? And please, anyone is free to answer.
Well, I'll jump in here if you don't mind me just,
Please.
adding something, at least starting things off. So as I mentioned before, I'm Mike Wallace. I'm actually from Newark, New Jersey, even though I've been living in California for the last 36 years. But the first time I heard of the Tuskegee Airmen, I would have to say was right when I joined the Air Force. I didn't hear about them prior to that. But when I went into the Air Force back in the 80s, it was talked about then. Like I said, it wasn't really taught in school, at least where I went to school, it wasn't taught at all. So it was the Air Force that got me more involved. And I went in as an enlisted individual when I first joined up for the Air Force. I finished my college degree after I got out. So that was one of the ones that kind of inspired me, because I started saying, well, then how do you become a pilot? What do you have to do? And they said, oh, you have to become an officer. And so, usually they say, well, if you're going to become an officer, it's best to go into engineering. And so that's how I ended up going into engineering. Although my degree is not in aerospace engineering, it's in electrical engineering, but it was the start. And it was one of the things that really did inspire me to move forward with my career, even after getting out of the military and moving forward. And I think Mr. Harvey even mentioned about, we talked about civil rights, but the Tuskegee Airmen were before the civil rights. I mean, they were still part of that movement, after the Reconstruction period, after the Emancipation Proclamation, we had all these things going, but they were the ones that drove the military to be integrated. So looking back at the history of the Tuskegee Airmen, it was definitely inspirational in my life and helped to inspire me to move on what I wanted to do in life. So that's my 2 cents on it, and I'll just leave it from there, let someone else answer.
No, please.
I wanted to comment on that, if I may.
Yes, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I was first became aware of Tuskegee Airmen as a great experiment. During my early aerospace career, I started at Rocketdyne in 1956. And one of the things that I noticed among the few blacks that were there, different than myself, they had developed a kind of a philosophy looking at the system as giving them assignments that were spring-loaded to failure. And so the Tuskegee experiment, the way they looked at it, it was designed to prove that blacks couldn't fly. And as a result of that, the evidence was overwhelming that they could. And that's kind of been the story of my life, to accept assignments throughout my career, some of which may have been designed to prove I couldn't do it. In fact, I prevailed in my entire 40-year career. So I had an early association with the Tuskegee Airmen, because some of the engineers were very reserved about accepting assignments. And they referred back to the Tuskegee experiment as being not really designed for success, but spring-loaded to failure. So I kind of dealt with that phenomenon, trying to encourage young black in every avenue of life, not to be concerned about the purpose for which you're given something, but try to make it work. And that would be a benefit to you and the rest of us, all of our lives.
Thank you. Mr. Beck, when did you, or Mr. Harvey? Please,
You know, I would like to echo what Shelby said, that, and particularly in the 60s, people were trying to do two things at once. They were trying to prove that they could accept that Blacks were part of society, but they were also, like Shelby says, given jobs. And I think I mentioned in my talk that my first engineering job was with General Dynamics, because they wanted to get a Black engineer. They put me in the front office, and they knew that a fresh college graduate would not be successful in the front office. And I suppose in a sense, they were correct, because I didn't stay there very long. I did get a good experience with General Dynamics, and working with the assignment that I had was what turned out to be cryogenics. And I learned a lot, and I felt that I did pretty good. Got involved in a lot of different experiments, working with both the Army missile system and the Navy missile systems. But when I found out that they were doing their own little experiment, when they hired me, I said, well, hey, I've had enough of this. So that's when I said, plus I wanted to work on missiles. I didn't want to work on airplanes. I mean, I wanted to work on airplanes. So I went to Long Beach, went to work for Douglas. But getting back to the first part of the question, I'm originally from Michigan. And my inspiration for aviation came from being just west of Detroit and seeing all these Army, all these airplanes that were being produced in Detroit, because during the 40s, all the General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler that were producing cars in 1940, 1941, they switched over to aircraft. And Willow Run factory produced a lot of B-24 Liberators. And I lived on a farm just west of there. And it seemed like, and of course I'm exaggerating a bit, but it seemed like almost every day there would be dozens of P-38s, B-24s, C-119s, all these airplanes being manufactured in Detroit. They would fly west to go to Kansas and Iowa to be outfitted, and then go back to the East Coast to be shipped over to Europe. And of course, I was a kid at that time, and I always thought, well, boy, one of these days I'm going to be up there. But as far as I knew during the war that there were some Black pilots, so I didn't have any reason to believe that I couldn't be a pilot. I didn't know, I didn't identify them as being Tuskegee Airmen, but of course at that time, and some of you probably remember this, that especially in the kind of the rural area, there were no Black newspapers except for the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender, at least for those of us in the Midwest. Right. The Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier. And we subscribed to the Pittsburgh Courier. And so every week we would get this newspaper, and they were the only ones that would report on the fact that there were Black pilots fighting over in Europe. And so I was aware of that. I wasn't actually aware of the Tuskegee connection until much later in my career. Some of the other engineers I've worked with, other people I've worked with, were turned out to be Tuskegee Airmen. They didn't identify themselves as Tuskegee Airmen. They just said, well, yeah, they served in the Second World War. One of them by name was Jim Wiley. And of course, Karen is very familiar with Jim Wiley. He lived locally, worked for Boeing, and he and I took a few trips together for the company in working with various customers. And right now, in our Museum of Flight exhibit, we have some of Jim Wiley's artifacts on exhibit in the museum, along with Bill Holloman. And at the time I knew Jim, I knew he was in the Second World War, and I knew he had something to do with aviation, but I didn't realize that he was, that he had actually shot down German airplanes, that he was part of the crew that won the, after the war was over with, a crew from the 332nd Fighter Group won the National Air Force competition, fighter competition. That was in 1948, I believe, 1949. And Jim Wiley was the crew chief on that whole thing. Another name I mentioned before was Harry Stewart. He was one of the pilots that flew in that. And so these people, I didn't actually join the Tuskegee Airmen group until about 1998, 1999. It was 1998 when I first met, at that time, General Davis, General Benjamin O. Davis.
Thank you.
He made me much aware that the fact that Tuskegee played a big part in this whole thing. But it was, for me, it's been quite an adventure.
Thank you. So it must be amazing to have such a personal connection and to hear the historical, the large historical context. Mr. Beck, where are you from, and when did you first hear about the Tuskegee Airmen?
Thank you. As I mentioned in the intro, I'm from just a small little town in southeast Alabama, right on the Alabama-Georgia border. And so Tuskegee, although it was less than an hour and a half from my hometown or whatever, I think probably the first time the previous gentleman on the panel mentioned, I heard about it when I first joined the Air Force. I joined the Air Force back in the early 90s or what have you, spent 18 years growing up in Alabama and not knowing the significance of the historic events that had taken place there at Tuskegee. And one of the things that's kind of cliche is to kind of mention it or whatever, but history's kind of written by the victors, and another cliche is knowledge is power or what have you. And so you take those two together or whatever, and the fact that it wasn't being taught in the schools in the areas where all that historic activity was taking place is a significant factor, what have you, when people are trying to hold you down or whatever and limit your access to knowledge. And one of the best things that we could do as a society or whatever is to share that knowledge. The gentlemen and ladies here on this panel or what have you have excelled in the things that you all have done, setting the stage for other young Black kids or what have you to come up in society today. And so that's what I want to try to continue to do as well, or whatever is help further that knowledge. So when you leave a place, you always leave it better than when you started. And I can see that in in the careers of everyone that's talking here today.
Thank you. I'd like to first mention that if you are not following Gary Moore's presentation, you should really follow it. It's amazing to see all the planes and statues he's going through. So please check that out if you're check it out. It's quite interesting. The conversation actually had me thinking of what my next part was about the representation. So Mr. Harvey just talked about how you hear about it. We didn't hear about Black pilots per se, unless it was from maybe Black papers back in the day, versus Mr. Beck just talked about, you may or may not have heard about it, although you're much closer to where it's actually happening. So sometimes that media representation and sometimes those stories getting out there is very limited. it's very limited. I find it interesting that somehow we're able to make sure we draft African Americans in particular for World War II, but we're not able to make sure that they know all of the roles that they play, like even during the draft for that matter, even or for their descendants. So I think that's it's crazy that we can get the information out that we need people for a draft, but we can't get the information out that we have Black pilots. So my next question, and this is open, so sorry, Mrs. Robinson, I assume you knew growing up, obviously. My dad was in the Army, so I assure you, my dad told me what he was, told me about the Tuskegee, so I'm assuming your dad told you, so I didn't want to leave you out. But I think it's amazing how that personal connection, and I think it's amazing if you have options and the opportunity for the personal connection. But the reason I asked where everyone was from, and the reason I asked when you first heard about them, is because I think we have a problem where we don't tell, like, obviously we have this great presentation on the Tuskegee Airmen today. We're representing, we're honoring them today. But unless you actually go to something like this, if your schools don't talk to you about it, how do you find out about it? And I feel like the other way that I find like the Tuskegee Airmen in particular is obviously movies and that type of representation. So even Mr. Harvey's presentation, he had Battlestar Galactica. I forget the gentleman's name that said he was inspired by the Red Tails. We have the movie The Red Tails. We have the movie The Tuskegee Airmen. Those type of representations are out there. I will put this as a general question to the panelists. Are you happy with how the Tuskegee Airmen have been represented? So let's assume you've heard of them. Are you happy with how they've been shown and what history has shown of them?
I think that goes back to your first question or whatever. It's like, when did we hear about them? Because you look at today's society or what have you, and everybody is developing this social influencer or what have you mantra or whatever for like as a career field. And so what would have been the significance of the Tuskegee Airmen had we had this type of technology actually talk about things that they're doing or what have you? I have a 21-year-old son that is always on social media, what have you. Like recently wrote a new book or whatever and like reaching millions of people. But to have this Tuskegee Airmen or what have you only kind of be depicted in a film here or a film there, and then we have to go to an event to hear the significance of them, I think it would say it's underserved for what they did for Black society as a whole, as well as like integration and like desegregation of the military overall. Because prior to them or what have you, as you talked about the 100 officer mutiny or whatever, would that happen today or could that happen today, given the ability for us to actually reach people across the internet? When I was at the Air Force Academy, one of the things that we kind of turned as a new, coined as a new term or whatever was digital immigrant and digital native. A digital immigrant is someone my age or what have you that had access to computers, not so much the internet from a very young age. And a digital native is someone that has only known connected society. And so they have the ability to actually have access to a wealth more information than someone would have 30 or 40 years ago.
You know, Dr. Taylor, I want to add a little something to what Mr. Beck just talked about. And actually, I know we are only focusing on, well, the question so far has been focusing on Tuskegee Airmen and what we've heard about in the past. And as I mentioned before, I didn't hear about it into the Air Force. Mr. Beck was the same way. I believe others were the same too. But let me just take that a step further. Juneteenth, I didn't hear about until later on in my life. So that was something that was not taught in school. So yes, the information that we received, it's been later. And I think Mr. Beck actually alluded to this, that the fact that if we would have heard some of this information earlier in our lives, it could have been some key or critical things that would have helped inspire a lot of Blacks to make a lot of progress, because he said it, knowledge is power. And so without that, and without knowing some of the contributions that were made in the past, you know, it did kind of stifle our progress in a sense. So now we know it. Now we have to continue to spread that knowledge forward, you know, each one teach one as best as you can and help others out. So
comment on that?
Yes.
I guess the way I would characterize that is that, as we all know, we've recently been exposed to the hidden figure phenomenon. That phenomenon is not new. Even when I was in aerospace in the 50s, for two reasons. Some of this stuff was confidential because we were competing with the Russians. And what I found is that people didn't believe it. And I could not spend the time convincing them because it was confidential. So being in these areas where we were denied in the past were not only unbelievable, but in many cases, we couldn't talk about it until much later. So just as the Hidden Figure movie came out several years ago, one was led to believe that the aerospace was dominated on the East Coast, which is far from the truth. As we speak, the West Coast, Black History museums and aerospace museums are trying to spread the word that the aerospace inclusion of Blacks was throughout the country, and particularly on the West Coast. So the hidden figure phenomenon, we're beginning to overcome that. And of course, the Tuskegee Airmen were part of that. It was, for some reason, there was not an overwhelming desire to identify positive contributions by Blacks and women historically. And I'm glad to report in this era, there's a tendency that we're overcoming that by the involvement of young Blacks and females, and by being on discussing that phenomenon. I was deprived of it. My children and grandchildren knew of it only because they knew me. And one of the most significant things that I can point to is when I had a display in the Aerospace History Museum in Downey. They asked me for some personal background, and my daughter and granddaughter were pictured in the display. So when they came to the event to see my display, they were surprised that they were in it. Until this day, I've been unable to really appreciate the impact on them to see their father and grandfather on display as making positive contributions to aerospace and society in general. The negative news travels far and has long-lasting lives. These stories, for some reason, they have short lives and get buried. I'm glad that it looks like nowadays we're overcoming that phenomenon.
So I want to just intersperse something as an educator and also a founder of two schools. Mr. Beck, I was not aware that you were at JPL. So let me talk a little bit about the partnerships that we try to get to uplift our students and the internships. So I was able to touch bases with Marion Colson at Metro, African-American lady, who has an internship at Metro. I've put students in there every single year. I've scrambled to get internships other ways. And I'm listening to what Mr. Jacobs is saying and what you said. I also try to hire teachers that are willing to reach out and talk about all things and have been lucky enough to do that. So I guess in a long run, what I'm saying, I hear what you're saying, and I hear what you're saying about social media, but I also would like to reach out to any of you that are still in the industry to reach out to schools. Because again, if we don't have the role models, now I'm a biomedical engineer, a little bit different from what you guys do, but interested in all engineering. I've had engineering at my high school since 2011, and I've had 6, 7 students wanting to go into aerospace engineering, and 2 that I put out at Boeing as interns. But I need more of those because, you know, there's only so many places that I can go, and I need to know more people so that I can share that with others. I was also fortunate enough to be our graduation speaker this year, which was kind of odd because, you know, we'd been a year of being not at school. And so they asked me, it's our 10th anniversary of our high school. And one of the things that I say to my students when they're graduating is, please reach back and pull someone up with you. Don't forget. And I think in the past, what may have happened, the struggles that we have had, when we get out there and we become successful, we forget about everybody else because we finally made it. But if we remember to reach back and pull several people up behind us so that they in turn pull several people up behind us, I think eventually this is all going to work out. I was fortunate enough to be in the civil rights movement in the 60s. And, you know, sometimes I get discouraged and I say, my God, we're still trying to do the same thing that we're trying to do in the 60s. Absolutely. And by now we should be over that. and, you know, progressing. But I think the whole idea is to train people to reach back and pull up. Thank you.
And Dr. Shannon, I definitely appreciate that. And like any way I can help facilitate interactions with JPL or what have you, like from the STEM side of the house, I would be happy to do that. My team goes out to the local community on like frequent occasions, like pulling along women in the STEM environment or whatever. And I've gone to a couple of schools myself locally there in the Pasadena area to have those conversations. And so like, I'd be happy to share my information so that way we can like exchange ideas.
Thank you.
Do you know of Janelle Weldon at JPL?
Yes.
I met them. They do have internship programs, and been in touch with her just recently with some people here in the San Diego area, trying to get them involved in internship programs. So I know that JPL, NASA in general, but JPL in particular, has internship programs, and there are people that are trying to stimulate the inclusion of female and minorities currently as we speak.
Yeah, and JPL has been like successful in that arena by actually having diversity groups across the spectrum to help facilitate those type of like engagements. And so I think with that, we're open to any ideas moving forward. We've been going out to HBCUs. I have a couple of team members right now that are from like North Carolina A&T, and so like great additions to my team. So I'm looking forward to more exchanges.
Thank you.
And Dr. Shannon, I also do the same thing. Even though I'm at Raytheon, I'm not in the hiring area anymore like I used to be. I was a department manager and I used to hire and go out to recruiting. But another thing is I also, like yourself, parallel my career, I used to also in education. So I taught 13 years, taught math, algebra, statistics, and calculus at a community college, and also taught at Cal State Long Beach system engineering. So I know what you mean about getting the students involved. Now at Raytheon, what I'll do is I'll pass my information on. If anyone's interested in trying to, getting into engineering, I have a lot of the section managers and department managers. I can pass their information on to them. So I'll do the same thing. I'll offer it up to you. Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep.
I will say that one of the most beautiful things about being Black in aerospace is that all Black people help you. Like, no, being honest, like I have never ran into a Black aerospace professional that did not at least respond to my email, that did not help me find the right person, that did not help me figure out like where I'm going next. When I was a student, like I actually interned at JPL. That's one of the most wonderful things about, I think, being Black in aerospace is that you automatically have an entire network that wants to see you succeed and wants to see more of themselves in you. So I think that's one of the most wonderful things about being Black in aerospace in particular. But I wanted to give Dr. Ms. Robinson a moment to speak about whether or not you were happy about how the Tuskegee Airmen had been represented, or for that matter, taught. I just wanted to give you a moment to answer that question as well.
Oh, certainly. I kind of am. It's been a long time in coming. Two things I want to say. Number one is we don't really call it the Tuskegee experiment because that has the negative connotations of the syphilis experiment that happened on the grounds of Tuskegee. So we call it the Tuskegee experience is what we call it. And so that it's more of a positive thing. Number two, okay, Shelby, I see you. Number two is, I believe in 2007, the U.S. Mint came to us to do a quarter for if we wanted to, have a quarter. And so this year, Alabama, who was the last state to mint the quarter, has a picture of a Tuskegee Airman on their America the Beautiful series. And the reason why it's so remarkable to me, number one, is because it has a Tuskegee Airman on it, but it has 4 words that Harvey and I use in all of our presentations. It says, they fought 2 wars. And that's on the back of that. And it says that we did fight a war in Europe and in the Pacific against fascism, and we fought a war here in the United States against racism. So it's acknowledged and it's minted on our coins now. And Harvey, when I see you, I will give you yours, okay? We just haven't been able to see each other in the past year, but I did get a lot for our chapter. And so everyone that became a member or renewed their membership, I do have, the quarters for people. So that's what I want to say. And so we're finally being acknowledged in a lot of things in the Congressional Medal of Honor. So people do know about us, but I'm finding out that kids don't know a lot. So we go out to the schools and to other places. Harvey goes like to Rotary clubs and stuff and letting people know about what's going on. But we do have to keep pounding on the young people about the opportunities that are available now for kids in our youth program that we have. And we do train kids that want to learn how to become pilots or whatever. So that's what we're trying to do, is reach back and bring up the kids and teach them about drones now and about aerospace and aviation opportunities for them now that were not available when my dad was coming up. He always, like Harvey said, all they want to do is fly. That's all they want to do. Daddy used to look up at the sky and says one day he was in a small city in Georgia called Toccoa, Georgia. And he'd look up in the sky and says, one day I'm going to fly one of those planes. And I know my grandfather told him, boy, you're not going to do that. The only people that fly planes here are crop dusters, and they're not going to teach you to be a, crop duster, but he did. And he succeeded in what his dream was. So that's why it's important for kids to learn about other opportunities. But I am kind of happy about the way we're being portrayed, but we need a little bit more so people will know and have the opportunities that they didn't have at that time.
First of all, congratulations.
Comment follow-up to that. One of my, I'm relatively pleased retiring here in Oceanside. Were you able to see the video presented by Congressman Levin?
Yes.
Okay, well, Oceanside has named the airport after Tuskegee Airmen, and have gone to great lengths to acknowledge them here, as well as the city has been collaborating with Juneteenth since for the last 15 years. At that level, the citywide recognition, not just a few blocks in the neighborhood. So I'm proud to say that the Tuskegee Airmen and the Juneteenth is well represented here. I would like to see that throughout the U.S., where cities buy in, as well as Tuskegee Airmen and positive role models throughout the industry are presented. So not only Blacks can learn, but whites can learn that not only can we do things, we have track records of having performed.
Do you know that you all have a Tuskegee Airmen Day in the state of California? Do you guys know that?
I don't know if they specifically have a day, but it is mentioned with the Juneteenth and the fact that we have an airport. I think they have an annual event at the airport acknowledging the fact that it is named after a Black man, which you would not know unless you inquired.
Well, there are 4 states in the United States that have a Tuskegee Airmen Day specifically, and it is the 4th Thursday in March. Right. The state of Washington, we got it through our legislative process. California was the first state, believe it or not, was Arizona, which for a long time did not even acknowledge Martin Luther King, but they were the first state to have a Tuskegee Airmen Day. The second state was California. The third state was Washington State, and the fourth state was Colorado. So we're trying to get this to be a national thing, to have a national Tuskegee Airmen Day, the 4th Thursday in March. I don't know why we picked that date, but Arizona picked the day, so we just took it up and did it. We went through our legislative process, and it was a big deal. So we do celebrate, of course. This last year we couldn't, but usually we do have a big fanfare that, talks about our history and everything, and we all get together and celebrate it. Harvey, let's see.
Well, we get a big boost from promotion from the Museum of Flight. They have a Tuskegee Airmen exhibit, and I usually do a monthly program, a public program at the Museum of Flight, that includes most of what you saw in my talk today. And so we meet at their facility every month. Our local chapter does. And so it's a lot is being done to get the word out. We have, as Karen mentioned, we have a youth program, which allows the youth to get involved, and we hopefully have made an influence on some of their choices. Along with the Museum of Flight, we have a Seattle public school that's associated with the museum. It's called the Aviation High School. And many of those students there I've talked to several of the classes. They have it's a regular high school curriculum, and it's obviously a STEM school, and it's been proven to be a very good experiment. And of course, I guess because of that, I have two sons. They're both engineers. I don't know where they got that from. I have, as I said, 11 grandchildren, and a couple of them, one is a graduate engineer, and a couple others are in the engineering, are leaning toward engineering. And I don't know where that comes from, but obviously they have been influenced by not only by myself, but other people I've been associated with. Because as I've gotten to know Karen and other members of our chapter who are sons and daughters of Tuskegee Airmen. And it's really, I find it very enlightening. I guess I feel a little bit jealous because I guess I wish I could have been a Tuskegee Airman or done something like that. But I was, been relegated to all this commercial aviation, but I'm very, I guess I lean toward the military quite a bit, even though I didn't serve in the military. I have a son that's a captain in the Navy. And so I thought that he should go to the Air Force Academy. And he said, well, no, in the Air Force, you either fly or you die. And so,
okay, well,
that's a little crazy. But he said he wanted more, so he chose the Navy. He went to the Navy Academy, and he ended up flying, but he flies under the water. He's a submarine officer, and so he flies under the surface, and I'm kind of proud to say that now that, of course, his flying days are over with. He's now a professor at the Naval Academy. And but I think the portrayal of the Tuskegee Airmen is an excellent role model for a lot of young people. And we're all privileged by having such a group to aspire to. The same as, I'm sure that Shelby has, he came into engineering about this, maybe a couple of years before I did. And
1956?
1955.
Okay, well, that's the same time period. Well, one of the footnotes I wanted to add, I see this time period as a true beginning of the end of the hidden figure phenomenon.
That's right.
And so I'm encouraged that it's happening. The only thing I have an uncertainty about is how long will it take?
Yeah, it's been a long time. Juneteenth was 1865, right?
That's right. So I guess it requires us to be patient and persistent.
Well, finally, the rest of the world is starting to hear about Juneteenth. It only took 150 years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all,
I think it's going to take, excuse me, but I think it's going to take, you said how long will it take? Based upon my experience, it's probably going to take as long as it takes to phase out all the carryover from the end of World War II to like say the beginning of the 60s. All of that that developed during that time, all that's gonna sort of phase out before a lot of that takes effect, what you talk about not takes effect, and some of the things that go forward as far as being recognized as Black people in aviation. Just based on my experience. But I think that's what it'll take. I think they'll just purely take the phasing out. You know, in other words, as people go by, time passes by, as long as it's not nurtured, which is what the president is attempting to try to prevent. As long as it's not nurtured, all those things that was done back then, if it's not nurtured further up the road, then it'll just phase out because there'll be no more stories to tell about it. There'll be no more to carry, nobody else to carry it over, carry it forward. So I think it'll just be more of a phase out. It'll be a phasing out action of the old years, you know, the segregated years and all that stuff going forward. Because I got it in 1981 in the Air Force, and I've seen a lot of that. That was since 1981. I put 8 years active duty. I was an ROTC cadet prior to that, and a lot of stuff that I witnessed was from officers that had entered maybe just after I was born. You know, they had the same mentality that they had back in the old South and stuff, and some of the same stuff that the Tuskegee Airmen were going through. They was actually, you know, exercising the same stuff during, you know, the late 70s and early 80s. So I figured, you know, it wasn't like they was trying to do this. It was just an innate thing that they would do. It's just the way they was trained and taught to do something. Was just prior to, or just after the armed force of the Air Force became integrated. So it's just a phasing of time, you know. You may see it within 2 decades or whatever it takes. But some of that old, some of the old stuff to phase out and move forward into the new, you know, decades and centuries to go forward. But I believe it's going to play that part. It's just a, you know, and then too, what's helping a lot is that nowadays, even during my time, a lot of stuff like this wasn't discussed. You know, this was no education. But I spent 3 years in the junior ROTC program at Dominguez High School there in Compton, California, and I was going to talk by one of the. He was a World War II pilot, Lieutenant Colonel, and he taught us all about the Air Force and everything. All of the, you know, we thought we needed to know, but Dominguez was mostly a mixed school, and a lot of the guys was Black in the units. And Tuskegee Airmen wasn't brought up. You know, I learned about the Tuskegee Airmen after I had left the Air Force. Actually, you know, I put a lot of time in it. Actually, they come up after I left the Air Force. But he didn't teach that in customs and courtesies in the Air Force. He didn't teach that. And so, you know, it was a big section. So if he had taught that thing, it would have been more. It would prepare me much better. Even if the Black guys prepared them much better to go forward, knowing more about the history of the Air Force, you know, in that aspect. Now, it may have been conceived as a social program, so it may not, a social studies, so it may not have been to the best interest of the school or the school district for them to teach us that during Air Force Customs Security, you know, junior ROTC, ROTC run. But it still would have helped, though, you know. So there's this little idiosyncrasies like that you miss out on stuff like that. Those big key, that would have been a very good key, because we was actually in almost an emotion of doing the same thing that Tuskegee Airmen were doing in the Air Force during my time, and we run into some of the people, the same old attitudes and stuff that they had back in at the end of World War II, or Korean War. You know, some of the same discriminatory practices practicing then. It was carrying that forward, and you run right. It was just bomb. You know, run right into it, and you didn't recognize it. You know, you didn't recognize. You was a good old guy in the air, but you just didn't recognize it. And so, as a consequence, you know, a lot of things got missed and stuff, and a lot of things got excused, and a lot of things was done, but it was only after the fact you could do anything about it. So education plays a lot of part of it, but I believe it's a phase again. It's going to be a phase against some of the old guys and into the new guys, new people that's coming in. Now, because I have my youngest niece. She just popped up with the idea she wanted to get into space, and she's only like 9 years old. So
that's good.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know where she got that from either, but that's what she's interested in. So now I got to concentrate on her because she's down there in Houston and stuff. So I'm trying to concentrate on her now because I see that's what she want to do, and only a few of us picked up on what each other wanted to do. So hers was again in the area of aerospace and stuff like that. So
that's wonderful that your family wants to. The family is so exposed. So it's absolutely wonderful, especially since we just said that like it takes a personal connection Mrs. Robinson, I wanted to say that's congratulations on getting a quarter for the Tuskegee Airmen. I'm sure like we're all going to be looking for them. So congratulations on that
Yeah.
one. When are they coming out, or are they already out, or like?
Well, they were in limited production or whatever they call it, but they will be coming out into circulation very soon. They cost a lot more than a regular quarter would, because I think I got 100 and it cost me almost close to $50 to get 100 of them. So, and they're for the chapter members, but they should be coming out in circulation very soon. So we're very, very, very happy with that. And I'm so happy with the 4 words. It is so important for people to understand that they fought 2 wars, and it's acknowledged. And that's what's so remarkable about it.
I also wanted to bring up something that Mr. Harvey said in his presentation about basically saying that they just wanted to fly. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that they weren't called the Tuskegee Airmen until after the fact. Like no one, correct me if I'm wrong on this, my understanding is that they weren't called the Tuskegee Airmen, they just so happened to be, they called them Red Tails, but like the term Tuskegee Airmen was like coined after the fact. Am I misunderstanding? At least that's what I read. And I'm asking specifically because we're saying that we didn't hear about it, but maybe they didn't know what to tell you. If that makes sense. Like maybe we can tell you there are Black pilots out there, but they didn't necessarily know. Like they could tell you the, I guess the 99th and 100th, I believe, or what's on the what was on the presentation. But my understanding is that Tuskegee experience that wasn't named until after the fact.
And that's entirely correct. It was in 1972 when the Tuskegee Airmen International was formed. And of course, that's almost 30 years after the war. Before that, they were just known as, the Black pilots of the Army. And it was when these Black pilots, in conversing with each other, they realized that a lot of people didn't know about the story. And so the main reason, the 2 main reasons that the organization was formed was, one of them was to tell the story so that people would know. And the other is to influence young people, because there were so many young people. Like when I mentioned the story about I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, and my dad said, "No, you don't belong there. You can't." And the recruiter, the recruiting sergeant, told me exactly the same thing. He said, "You don't want to go there." He said, "There's been no one there before, so you don't want to go there." And so they knew that. And part of our purpose in our chapter, and part of the purpose of the organization, the Tuskegee Airmen International, is to cut through all this and bring the young people along, let them know. Of course, it's getting so, this story has been being told for about 40 or 50 years, and it's getting around more, and more people are getting to be familiar with it. And even young people now have opportunity to learn about it. They've seen the movie, The Red Tails. They've seen the shows on TV. They've heard us talk about it. But in a way, it's a little bit like Juneteenth. Some people have been aware of it for 100 years. Other people just became aware of it last week.
Amen.
Last year I heard about it. So
I have one word of encouragement. I have just one more comment, and I'm going to have to leave. I have a word of encouragement based on the hidden figure phenomenon. The fact that the museum in Los Angeles, with the Space Museum there and the Black History, and the movie came out, which kind of inadvertently overlooked the West Coast. I think that is going to lead to some impetus for the spread of recognition of Black and female contributions that will accelerate it beyond what would be considered the norm. So perhaps it won't take as long as it otherwise would if the West Coast hadn't been stiffed in the movie.
Well, I guess that kind of brings me to my other question. So they weren't called the Tuskegee Airmen until after the fact. I think that there was a great comment that was said that they just wanted to fly. And then even what's on the quarter saying they fought 2 wars. I think sometimes we forget that the Tuskegee Airmen weren't trying to be Tuskegee Airmen. They were just trying to fly, right?
Right.
It's history that looks back and reminds us, wow, that was the first time it happened. And it's history that, obviously now we're digitally connected. Now we have an opportunity to, talk about the conversation with hidden figures. But when they were in the moment, they were just trying to, learn how to fly. They were just trying to have access. They were just trying to survive, for that matter. They were just trying to survive a war, So
a lot of us from being trying to be prestigious too. Flying was something, or was something anyway, that was a very prestigious thing to do. It was very
absolutely.
It was something that you could brag about.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so and like a lot of the white pilots would come back, with medals galore. They would be famous. I mean, there was a lot of attention paid. It was just something that you'd be looked up to. Hey, you're a pilot. Fighter pilot at that. And so when a Black person is approached, wanted to try to do something like that, it would be almost it'd be something. It'd be a bright into what the white guy was, his status. So it would brush up against his status. When I was in the Air Force, I was an aircraft maintenance technician on that aircraft you're looking at there, right there. And I was a Black staff sergeant in there, but I guess they considered me sort of like a smart ass, because I was a Black staff sergeant, And it was just, ever since I led all the way, I led completely through basic, through tech school, all the way up to McCord Air Force Base in Washington, D.C., until they finally culminated enough to get some guy that I didn't know anything about to come in and discriminate. And I just wasn't prepared for it because, like I said, we never studied that type of thing before. And I was always on the good side of things. But it was always an air in the air. It was always an air up there. Competitive. It was competitive, very competitive. Even in maintenance, it's competitive as a pilot to be the best and to be someone that shines out overall. So if you got a Black guy shine out of all these white guys, and when I was in the ratio wasn't, it was like maybe 10 Black folks to 100 white folks, and you sitting out there on the front end like a Rolls Royce, and so it just didn't make them feel good. It just made most of the guys feel uneasy about this guy knowing this much about that they couldn't catch me. And I was just running out front. They couldn't catch me. I was the color I am. And so it had some type of an offense. It just built an offense up in there, which I didn't have anything to know about. I just knew that on a competitive scale, rank for rank, it's always competitive. But they also had a racial aspect to it that was competitive too, that I wasn't prepared to combat. It was just the fact that I was a Black guy and in charge. I was supervising, and I actually took the position because I was more proficient at what I was doing than they were. And they didn't understand well what they saw. My background allowed me to do that because I was more well prepared when I went in. And it was a core. It was the core subject. Some guys went in the floor and out the door, right? And some guys went in for a career. I went in because the Air Force was fun to me, and it didn't make a difference what I'd done. And if I would have retired, I would have retired because it would have been a surprise. Hey, I'm 20 years now. I would have stopped then because somebody stopped me. But that's what I'm saying, though. The Tuskegee Airmen went to the same thing. They went to the same thing of although they were separate in separate units, but as a whole department of the Army Air Forces, or United States Air Force, it's all competitive. And so there's always going to be some competitive, racial competitive thing in the armed forces that you're going to have to put another 20% in there just to get past. Otherwise they're going to hold you in the view that you're competitive because you are coming from a different race and different stuff that were traditionally mine, and the public life is dominated for hundreds of years. And so it wouldn't look like you go out under you as a Black guy. They're going to turn around and say, well, hey Johnny, how's it going? How you doing in the Air Force and stuff? And all you got to do is talk about me.
That's a perfect conversation though about how I think that we are taught we have to be twice as good to get past the rewards, right?
It's a long story.
That's very much part of the ethos of the conversation that has to still happen of like, you have to be twice as good. You have to be you don't have the room to be wrong. You don't have the room to be wrong because you may or may not be representing every Black person behind you. You may not be representing every woman that comes behind you. And it's unfortunate that society still puts us in that space, but you're absolutely right. It's a really great point that there is a, I guess, hierarchy, for lack of a better word. There is a hierarchy.
There's a hierarchy there, and it's sort of a racially instituted. You know, in other words, they see a guy leading them, but they felt that they couldn't get ahead because part of their getting ahead was actually dominating me. That was part of the deal. They just couldn't go through that test and, you know, and go through and do your thing and do your right. They had to actually also show that they had control over the Black person too, going through this as part of that. And that wasn't part of my training and stuff like that. But it's from the social system from the United States and the armed forces. But that's what they was trying to practice that too. And it's a carryover back from World War II. You know, the Tuskegee Airmen was going through that on a larger scale than that. You know, in other words, they was like they was fighting between divisions. And, you know, Tuskegee Airmen, the 99th against the 405th or something like that. You know, but that's the deal. You know, that was the main problem within the armed forces, with the competitive scale of it, is such that you have to also overcome the racial aspects of getting ahead, as well as what you have to concentrate on what you're doing to get ahead technically, you know. So that's what I'm sure. I felt the same thing those guys did in there, and the ski Airmen did, and then after pursuit, all those guys. I felt the same thing because it was carried over from guys that carried over the same ideas and stuff from that era to, you know, the later eras. And so it was just, these guys are in pockets, okay? They're in pockets. They're just like the United States social system, they just serve the military. So it's a mirror of it. They just got a different job. So that's what you have to look at it within the armed forces that way. So and you don't hear a lot about it because it's behind the wall. You know, everything's on the UCMAJ.
Right. Like a public contract.
Right. So you can't. So lots of you just there's a lot of things unless you look over the fence and really inspect and look around. Nobody's never know all this stuff can happen in the flash of an eye inside the gate, and then you'll have the rest of your life to try to explain what happened, you know, to you while you was, you know, enlisted a commission under.
Ms. Robinson, I think Ms. Robinson, you had something to say? I think that's
kind of a funny thing. My dad was on a panel of other people that were in the military, and Sergeant Jones was a Buffalo soldier, and he said at the time the Tuskegee Airmen were like the rock stars or the rap stars of today. They got the nice fancy planes that are nice and shiny, and they were, you know, in their uniforms and everything. He said the Army gave me a mule and a bale of hay. And pretty soon that bale of hay was gone. That's all he had left was an ornery mule. But the Tuskegee Airmen had the plane. So that I thought that was kind of funny that even back then they knew that the Tuskegee Airmen were special and that they, you know, had things to do. And they also, so many people have stood on their shoulders to get where they were. I'm thinking specifically of the generals, the Black generals we have now. There's one that will tell you every time she speaks, she talks about the Tuskegee Airmen. That's Stacy Harris. Yeah. She's in California, and she was Deputy Secretary of the Air Force, and she's since retired. But a lot of them will say, yeah, we stood on their shoulders. So
I will say that I think it's interesting that, so the way I heard about the Tuskegee Airmen was that it was taught. Like, it was absolutely taught in school. Like, Tuskegee Airmen was taught in school, Juneteenth was taught in school. So and this is the 90s, but it was taught to me, but it was a footnote, if that's how I felt about it. Like, it was, by the way, first Black pilots, Tuskegee Airmen, next paragraph, you know, it was a footnote. So I know that I think we all are grateful that we're seeing more. I think we're grateful that we have more information. I guess my question I'd like to pose to the panel is, what is your vision for how you would be, what is your vision for what the Tuskegee Airmen can show? I think we've all kind of spoken about how if we had known earlier, or if most people had known earlier, it could have changed, you know, changed the lives of a lot of people. But we also have talked about how it wasn't necessarily spoken about, how it wasn't necessarily taught. I guess if you could, what would be your vision for how the Tuskegee Airmen not only are represented, but just like where they're actually showing up? Like, what would be your vision for that?
Well, my vision would be that, aerospace is viewed as a science. Ever since I'm from Tuskegee, Alabama. That's the lowest section of Tuskegee County. It's sort of like South, it's sort of like mid Alabama, and it's sort of a science. So anybody that's interested in science is going to pursue it. And so what they got to realize is, I'm just hoping they'll realize that because of the color of the skin of this guy who's pursuing that science, he doesn't have any impedance to, going forward and fully pursuing that science. Aerospace is a science, it's like all the other sciences. I'm sure that it's not any different than the medical field or the legal fields or anything else. It's going to have the same type of competition in them, but it was just so much emphasis placed on the aerospace industry, or the aerospace fields, particularly flying airplanes, stuff like that, been around and working on stuff like that. They made them such prestigious people, made them sort of stars, so to speak, that the competition is a little heavier, a little higher. But since it's science, you probably going to never stop pursuing that dream of flying or going out there and cranking starting the engine up on something. You're not going to stop that. It's just the human nature to do that. So that's what's got to be recognized. It's actually human nature, and not you following somebody else up in it because they done it. You know what I mean? Otherwise, you're not a second to someone else in the same field pursuing the same science. They got to recognize you as, in our case, as Black, pursuing this science because it's just interesting to you. It's sort of like space. Space is wide open. You really hardly anybody can start pursuing science in space. But in aerospace, within our atmosphere, and for flying things, the Wright brothers was my first idea of a flying thing. I could determine whether I could fly or not by just looking at it without any other information, other than the fact that, okay, well, they had enough money to engineer a flying machine. But the science of the machine is fully understood just because I visually observed what that is. So at my heart, I wouldn't say heavily influences where that actually was instituted in me. That's how the idea came about. Flight came about. It's more flight's more technically and scientifically involved in that. But basically looking at it, that's what a lot of them think. And you look up at aircraft and, oh, that's my daddy's thing. It's that kind of thing that you run into within the industry. You just can't claim it. It's just like going out there and getting your car and somebody else. You're constantly renting your life most of the time. That's what they got to get over.
As someone who says my dad's in the Army, and whenever I have a conversation about the military, I completely understand that conversation of being like, oh, that's my dad's aircraft, or that's my dad's thing. Like, I absolutely say that because I grew up hearing it from my dad. And if you don't have that access to military history and knowledge, you don't get the same thing. But I totally understand that point of saying, oh, that's my dad's, or that's like a different generation's access for it. So that's a really great point.
Yeah, so it's a science to me. If it's the science, you're gonna pursue it. I don't care who you are. If that's your interest, you're gonna pursue it. No matter what color you are, you're gonna pursue it. And the obstacles that you have to go through are unnecessary. In other words, a guy that's maybe running some of this, it might delay them for 10 years before they get to where they need to go. You got to stop off the side of the road and say, okay, what the hell happened here? I put my study aside. I'm still interested in it, but now I got to take care of this because this is going to happen now. This is some type of racial thing. Now it's going to take me 10 years to figure this out, get everybody back on track again. And so you lost a whole decade trying to pursue a career that you probably would have retired in the next decade doing, So that kind of stuff there is all the constraints, the roadblocks in the way a lot of Black folks. I've seen a lot of good guys here. I've graduated with guys that went a lot of different ways. These guys went like a 4-wheel drive across stuff trying to get to where they got to go, And they some of the religion they made it, no matter what it took. One of my best friends, he ended up staying in Africa because that was the best opportunity for him to pursue his career. Because he went all the way to Africa and worked, as a pilot and safe man there because he could do it there. And he compensated enough to enjoy working there in a different country because he couldn't do it here. So that kind of stuff is, I think it's got, like I said, I think it'll phase out because a lot of things I see now, I actually witnessed in my lifetime, but I see it's changing because some of the folks are coming up now much sooner than I come up with it. Like my niece, she came up with it. I wasn't even that age. She came up with it before I did at a younger age. So it's just something that they're more conscious of, aware of now, and they're pursuing stuff like this, you know, like eating candy. You know, it's like that. I don't think there's anything to be in the way, but all the old stuff I think will phase out over the coming decades, and then more of it's going to be more we're talking about now actually be executed. You know, the good things to be executed over these years, because it just won't be you won't be able to retain that type of system on a worldwide scale. The United States can't project itself on a worldwide scale like that is. You know, you already got. I listened to what this girl in India was talking about, and she criticized the United States on human rights issues alone. You know, so.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if you saw that, but yeah, she really got down on, you know, and it really wasn't much you can do about it. I mean, if you witness a lot of things, if you experience these things, you had to give at least 75–80% agreement on what she was talking about. So I don't think that in their best interest to carry over some of the old discriminatory practices and acts and stuff like that forward, because as a nation, the United States, the way it's made up now, they're going to need everybody, and you know, everybody's going to go and roll open the grave, but all this stuff coming up new is all mixed up. It's all much more integrated than what I came to. And I'm with 65, going 66. So, you know, it's got to change because the makeup has changed. So I think that's what's going to change. The makeup of the United States is actually going to change all this stuff.
I think there's thank you for the answers. There's definitely a lot of great points in there. I think that I would argue that the Tuskegee Airmen are something that we know about, and so there's access to information. I would argue that we still probably don't have as much access to like physically flying or physically becoming a pilot. Like it's actually still pretty expensive to become a pilot. And if you don't have access to a small airfield where you can train, you have access to like you can learn about it just like the way you can play a video game and simulate flying. That ain't the same thing, you know. So like my vision personally would be that, you know, what the Tuskegee Airmen represented was freedom, right? It was a freedom of flight. You got to fly, you got to be a part of something. So I feel like I would love for there to be more access and opportunity for everyone for that matter, but particularly young people to actually learn how to fly. I feel like that access is missing because I feel like on one hand, the education side is there, but I feel like the access is still a little bit cost prohibitive if you don't have access to an airfield, if you don't have access to like pilots. So that's one thing that I like. My personal vision would be that the Tuskegee Airmen could absolutely represent us to like what's the next thing for that. But that's my personal thoughts. Mr. Harvey, I feel like you just had a great flyer up there that I missed wrong.
We're talking about flying free. It's good that we do have the choice. You know, we do have a chance now to make a choice of what we want to do or pursue a particular, you know, like these guys, they wanted to fly. Well, now we can pursue that.
Absolutely. Well, we are over time right now, but I'd like to give anyone a moment if they'd like to say anything that was not covered by my questions. I think this is an excellent conversation. I believe Gary wants to narrate a tour of the Right Flyer project after this. So I'd like to first give the panelists a moment to say anything that they'd like to contribute to the conversation that wasn't covered in the questions.
Well, I'll just say.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you again for allowing me to participate again in this panel. I think it's always great again when we can share knowledge. It's one of the paramount and fundamental things to help us as a people grow. But one thing I don't think we really covered. We talked about a lot of the past, but we really need to also now talk about how do we take and leverage off the things from the past and move forward. how do we share this knowledge with the people and move forward, meaning the younger generation, my grandchildren that are growing up. I have 3 right now. So how do we get that information in? How do we encourage them? How do we inspire them? How do we still deal with the challenges that we have? I know Mr. Cook was just talking about, yes, now through integration, things are changing, and we may see things phase out. But you know, and with maybe that may be another topic or something, but that could be the next panel discussion. But we should look at, what do we do from here? Where do we go from here? And how do we improve? How do we take the things of the past, move forward, build on that? And I think that is very important to think about and to move forward with, so that we don't repeat the past, so we don't have to go through some of the same challenges that we've gone through. And then we can move forward and still build on the history that, you know, our forefathers and things have suffered and struggled through. Because as you know, maybe 1865 was when the Emancipation Proclamation was written and we were freed. But you got to think it wasn't really until after 1965, you know, when the Jim Crow laws were pretty much gone, the civil rights was gone. So we're only looking at really 56 years of really true progress. I mean, we've had a lot of things going on. I'm not discrediting anything that happened in the past, but we've only had really 56 years. So Mr. Cook nailed it down when he said, hey, you know, the things of the people, that their mentality, the way they were teaching people now would go away as we see the younger generation growing up and as they're more integrated. But we still need to prepare our children and children's children for, how do we move on? How do we encourage them to be pilots? How do we encourage them to be engineers? Because there's not a lot of us out there that are engineers and that are pilots that are going into the sciences, the fields like that. We're still lacking in those areas. I think it's maybe about 10% out of the 14% of Americans, that are African Americans, only about 10% that are engineers still out here today. And I'm not saying just engineers is the only thing, but we do need to encourage our kids to focus on other things in the future. And we still have a lot to go. So having said that, I know I don't want to go down that rabbit hole and start a new conversation up, but that's something I think we didn't discuss much here. We talked more of the past, but we should also still consider and think about where we're going to go in our future from here. So, but thank you again for having me on the panel. So appreciate it.
And thank you, Dr. Taylor, for recognizing me, even though I'm not in aerospace. But it is so important, as Mr. Wallace was saying, and Mr. Jacobs and everyone, we really need to reach back and pull our students forward with us, and our kids, grandkids, even non-relatives, neighbors or whatever, just to let them know. I'd like to see the Tuskegee Airmen just be a symbol of what was done, can be done, will be done. And for us to remember it as, okay, they did it. That means you can do it. It just means a little hard work and perseverance on your part. And I love the idea of the coin, which as soon as they're out, I want to get some. And as a matter of fact, I think this year, I'll have some of the teachers pass those out to the students in engineering as they go through and say, maybe they want to do aerospace, just so they understand that, you know, there's still kind of this dividing line, and let's do something about breaking that ceiling. We still have to do that with only about, I think there's actually about 8.5% of African Americans in engineering, close to 10, but we have to do something about that. The opportunity is out there. We just have to, and I think with the backing of, like you said, Dr. Taylor, you don't know of an African American person in aerospace who would not help another one out. I think as long as the kids understand that, and they learn how to advocate for themselves, that's a big thing, is, you know, I need help. I want to do this. How did you do it? And I want to do it. Those are the things that we need to teach our young people to continue to ask. So thank you.
Very well said, Dr. Shannon. Very well. And what I was going to say, I really appreciate Karen coming on board, because she represents the second generation. Her father was a Tuskegee Airman. And like Mike mentioned, we have to carry this on to the next generation and the next generation. And that's why I think it's important for not only for our sons and daughters, our grandchildren, but for all young people. So I think that all the comments said here are very well said, very well taken. And I really appreciate the feeling that's among this panel.
I'd like to say thank you to the panel. I definitely truly appreciate your insights, as well as appreciate not just the insights, but the historical significance of just understanding that we have different generations here, we have different walks of life here, and yet we all understand the importance of the Tuskegee Airmen, and we all understand, and we're all able to come together today to impart some of that knowledge. So I want to say thank you so much to the entire panel. Truly, truly appreciate you. Mr. Harvey, I really appreciate your presentation. Like, I think it was perfect framing for having this conversation. So thank you very, very much for that. I think that the most important thing that stuck out to me is when you said from, was it Alexander Jefferson, when you said, why do you fight for a country that hates you? Because it's my country. And I thought that is the most, it's so simple and so powerful. And it's what everyone is facing at the same time. But it's, you know, it's simple. It really is still like part of like who we are. And whether you find opportunities in the military, whether you find opportunities abroad, whether you find opportunities anywhere, it's still, you know, good or bad, it's still our country. So I think that that was definitely something really powerful to me that stuck out in your presentation. So thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you to the panelists who stepped up and didn't realize you were panelists. I appreciate you. Thank you for joining us today. You know, you never know what might happen. So with that, I think I should give it over.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for this panel, for this assembly in the AIAA LA and Las Vegas section. But it's an important topic. So the things we're talking about now, as far as the future goes, I think it has to be replicated among who you're, you know, the ones that you care about. And so that's the important thing there. What we talk about today also needs to be spread among everybody, all the young. It needs to be flowed down. And we talk about today, it needs to be flowed down. That's one way of getting the message there, but also putting behind it the history. That, you know, if you want to talk about the history, if you have some history to talk about that so they can hear it, so they're given more ammunition to, or I should say, not more ammunition, but more blocks to put up in that the bad people that's shooting at them. You can put some that overcome constraints. You have to overcome constraints when you're more knowledgeable and educated about things that happened in the past. You know, that way you're up at, you know, what might happen. If you're able to perform something, you're able to do something that, in case there is a risk of you, in case you run into roadblocks like I did, or like some Tuskegee Airmen did, I'm pretty sure they came in, they went in right raw, they went right up, it was flying right on the seat of their pants, so to speak. And so in order to prevent that and not have the younger people come up expecting all goody goods, you know, and all that stuff, so to educate them on what did happen and you know, and how they can do to prevent it from happening for them, or at least to recognize situations in such cases and what they should do in order to become victims of you know, past racial discrimination and all kinds of things like that. So I think that's the main key right there. Of course, education in the sciences is important too, but you know, it's so spread that I can't really speak about which way you go in the industries. There's a lot of different areas you can go in the aerospace industry. But history of it is the main thing. History of it. If I'd known about the Tuskegee Airmen coming out of high school, out of ROTC, you know, that gave me more than this up on what was going on, because I would understand why these guys are competing against me, you know, and it ain't got to do with your curriculum. You know, so that's important. So I think what we talk about now today, you just pass down, and it'll just spread. It just tear down to where it needs to go, and it'll be known knowledge. Then, in other words, you have to worry about decades later learn about the Tuskegee Airmen and stuff like that, because it's been passed down to them, and it, you know, and put it in the curriculum in school too.
Actually, your comment reminds me of something else. I think that one thing I want to say thank you to AIAA for hosting us, and thank you, Mike, actually, for your comment, for, you know, bringing up the conversation about encouraging people to be in STEM. And I know it sounds like a lot of people have children and grandchildren that are interested in engineering or space. For anyone else that's hearing this as well, I want us to also just take a moment to say that you don't have to be in STEM per se to contribute to this same conversation. Like, I mean that in the sense of, yes, we need more people in STEM, but we need people that are just as much social activists that are changing the story and the fabric of America just as much, because that second war that the Tuskegee Airmen fought, we are still fighting. So yes, join STEM if that is your passion, but we just as much need lawyers, we just as much need social activists, we just as much need politicians. We need every walk of life to be a part of this conversation to stop the systematic obstacles that Tuskegee Airmen face, that probably most people on this panel face every single day. So if you are not a STEM person, because obviously a lot of us work in STEM, so a lot of you are like, yes, STEM, take the classes, come, work at GPO, work at Raytheon, work at other places. Like, if that's not your calling, that's okay too, because you can just be as much a part of this conversation as well, because we need you. So I just wanted to take a moment to say that to anyone that is, STEM adjacent, quite frankly. Like, we need people that market. We need the people that market and tell us about the Tuskegee Airmen. We need the people that market and make sure that we see those jobs and opportunities. We need the people that do marketing to make science interesting. So if you are STEM adjacent, we need you just as much. And I just wanted to take a moment to recognize you as well. But with that said, I believe that I need to turn this back over to the AIAA event chair, but I believe that there is a few pictures that are coming, as well as another conversation from Mr. Gary Moore. And this, yeah, okay, perfect. So thank you, everyone.
Hello. I hope that we're back live again. Oh, I gotta wake up my my image so I can see what I'm talking about.
Okay, looks like Gary is offline. We'll wait for him. So let's show the photo from Shelby. So Shelby, can you comment on those photos you provided?
Nope, looks like it.
Yeah. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes. Shelby, go ahead first.
Yeah. These are photos of Alfonso Harris, who invited me to the inaugural of the airport named after Bob. I forget his last name now, but he was the one that invited me personally. He was a neighbor, personal friend. They're all deceased now, but I was happy to be able to tap into the Tuskegee Airmen in my retirement, as well as on one occasion, some others, but this gentleman was directly responsible for, in part, the naming and recognition of Tuskegee by the city of Oceanside. And if you saw the presentation by our congressman, they are very proud to maintain that airport in the name of Tuskegee Airmen. Again, these photos are when he got the award, the national award that they got a few years ago. He came by my house and shared it with me, gave me a private showing of his award.
Okay, let me know when you're cleared with this. Okay, how many more pictures will you have?
I think a couple more. This is in my yard. This is showing the detail of the award, and I think the next one would be myself with him, just enjoying the fact that he came to show me. That's a friend, the Tuskegee Airmen, another friend. And the next slide should be myself photographed with him, sharing with us the award that he had received, the national award. And so I was glad to be able to tap in directly into that and make that a part of my own experience over the years with heretofore not known well by a lot of people. And it encouraged me to accept the diversity and acceptance in our city, our region here, by the way they've reacted to the Tuskegee Airmen as well as myself.
Okay, so I'm not sure what's going on with this camera right now.
Okay.
I'm unmuted at the moment, but I don't know how long it'll, okay.
Yeah, let's wait for Gary for his coming back. Okay, he's back. Go, Gary, go ahead.
His mic is muted.
Yeah, I presume you're looking at me.
Yes.
Okay, I've got a touch to speak program on right now. I don't know why. So you're looking at me, and I'm going to go ahead and start the tour around the Wright Flyer hangar in Flybob Airport near Riverside. And this is the entrance that I'm going over to right now. And you can see the Pegasus at the entrance and the DC-3 or C-47 that's out in the entranceway. Coming back into the hangar, you see the rear view of the Wright Flyer. And this project, of course, has been in progress for many years. The sort of a measure of how many years it has been involved is this array of airplanes, which is on the wall, the display wall. There are almost 2,000 plastic airplanes in there, all built by one man, one of our members. And over here by the entrance is I think it's a 1/6 scale, approximately, image model of the Spirit of St. Louis, which was constructed by somebody else and supported by our former chairman, Fred Kulik, professor at Caltech. That model in the background right now is the Wright Flyer that we built to radio control model to do a preliminary study on it. The project has actually, if you count that one, our project since I've been involved has built 3 Wright Flyers. That one is the radio control model. The second one was a full-scale exact replica, with the exception of some strengthening for wind tunnel loads and replacement of the engine with a electric motor in order to be in the NASA Ames wind tunnel in 1999. And here we see the basic wing box of the Flyer. This is not a replica. This is a standoff scale look-alike with a great number of changes to make it a more controllable and flyable airplane. The Wright brothers, of course, were bicycle mechanics. In fact, they were bicycle racers. And so their point of view about flying was that you needed to control the airplane. And that was the theory that they initiated with the kite experiments in 1899 through the final flying model in 1903. In 1902, they worked out the 3 axis of control required for an aircraft. Nobody else had done that before. That was the subject of their patent, which was issued in 1907, I'm sorry. And so they began selling and demonstrating their flyer in 1908. They were ahead of the world in all aspects of controllable powered flight. In fact, they actually constructed their own engine. In a moment, I will show you the block, the aluminum block of that engine. But right now, you'll see the modern Revmaster 2100cc Volkswagen conversion engine that we are using. And this is a modern engine with dual ignition and a functional carburetor, good flight controls, and rather complicated powertrain because we put an 8-to-3 reduction gear behind it, in addition to the chain drive. This engine, of course, in modern terms, turns faster than the original Flyer, and so we had to slow down the turns. And also, let me say that the canard out here is both extended forward and also has a larger cross section. This is actually an NACA 2512 airfoil, which replaced the flat plate that flexed on the original Flyer. It is similar in that there are 2 canards out there, but these are larger than the original, scaled up 10%, both in span and in chord. And also the rudder is also extended aft and scaled up by the same factors. The control theory that they developed used actually a hip cradle, and the pilot would shift their weight to the high side of the airplane in order to okay, the video is stopped. What's going on here?
You're still there.
Yeah, for us, it's okay.
The video's still there? Okay, great.
Have
they flown this yet? Have they flown this model yet, or are you guys still in construction?
Well, we actually have taxied it at low speeds, and we developed a number of issues that we needed to work on at that time. The first issue was that the Wright brothers used tacks to secure the leading edge of the wing covering, and those tacks dropped out on the airport. People did not like that, so we had to replace all those tacks. That took a while. Then we have additional issues. We decided that since we were planning on now flying at an airport rather than on the Edwards Air Force Base salt flat or lake flats, that we needed to have 3 axes of control independently. And that's the part I was just about to mention. So the Wright brothers laid on the wing. We put a pilot's couch on there and moved the pilot forward about 18 inches to improve the center of gravity and the controllability, actually the stability. So the pilot would shift their weight to the high side of the airplane since they were trying to fly it straight and level. And that would pull a set of wires here on the lower side of the wing. Those wires were connected to the upper wing, aft the aft spars of the wing, and that would cause the wings to distort, so that when the pilot raised the one wing, the other wing would reduce its angle of incidence. And this essentially is the function of an aileron in modern airplanes. Unfortunately, when they did that with their 1902 flyer, their 1902 glider, they found that the resulting thing was the wing that was lifted up was supposed to be rising and turning towards. In fact, that wing produced more drag, and they actually turned the opposite direction in a phenomenon they called well digging, but is now known as adverse yaw. So what they and all modern aircraft do is when they raise that wing, they turn the rudder to balance that drag out and to yaw the airplane in the right direction. So indeed the ailerons and the wing warping do cause the aircraft to roll, but the secondary effect of increased drag on the high side ends up causing them to turn the wrong direction until you add the control of the rudder. And of course, any modern pilot will use what's called a balanced turn, coordinated turn, to negate that effect. And over behind me right now is a desk which an executive at, I think it was North American Aircraft Company, used when he was promoted to the executive office. If you lift up the drafting table here, it has a world map on the backside. So he was concealing his drafting table with the with that world map. Now, going back outside and in front of the airport again, and in front of the hangar again, I'm going to go over to the patio area, which is part of the flyers, part of the Flybob Airport. And here you'll meet a statue of the Wright brothers and a diorama of the original photograph of the first flight. Actually, not the first. Yeah, it was the first flight. And up above it is the model of the Wright flyer that was used in the 1903 Century of Flight Year Rose Parade. This flyer actually led the Rose Parade. And in the patio here, we can walk around, and over in the distance over here is what is known as Mount Rubidoux. And when you're flying into Flybob Airport, the practice is the standard pattern is to go to Riverside Airport about 3 miles away, and then bear left, fly towards the cross at the top of that mountain. When you start your approach, you aim just about 100 feet below the cross. And as you pass the San Gabriel River, you make your turn to final and line up on the airport, on the runway. So it's kind of an interesting approach. Anyway, down here at the bottom of this entrance here, we have a casting that is based off of the original drawings, reverse engineered drawings from the Smithsonian. This casting represents the crankcase of their engine. When they went to develop the flyer, they put out a request for a contract to all the automakers to build a 8 horsepower engine that was less than 200 pounds. Nobody could do that. In Dayton, they're only about 200 miles away from Pittsburgh, where Hall had developed the aluminum smelting process and was making castings. He got that patent in 1893. So 10 years after the patent on the development of aluminum, the production of aluminum, the Wright brothers used the first aluminum crankcase. That saved about 100 pounds on the way to the airplane. And they actually succeeded in producing 16 horsepower at Dayton in their shop in the summer of 1903. So our hangar is a plethora of full-scale models, or of larger scale models, flyable models hanging from the ceiling, and almost 2,000 plastic models surrounding along this display wall. And right here is a 1/8 scale stainless steel model used by Northrop in testing in about 1957. And it's doing an impossible maneuver for the Wright Flyer. That's because we were working on some of the electrical area above there, electrical facilities above there. And that basically is a tour of the hangar. Here is another member of our team, Don Crawford. He was instrumental in design of the propellers to increase the thrust and enable operation at the field elevation of Edwards Air Force Base. And in that time, it was called Dryden, NASA Dryden. Now it would be NASA Armstrong. So, do you have a word? A modest guy indeed. The propeller was fun thing to work on. Okay, so I think that pretty much gives us a tour. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer. We do need additional staff out here, additional volunteers to both act as docents to the display area and also to help in completing the airworthiness certificate, the airworthiness work. Right now, we're setting up to replace the screws in the rigging, and then we'll square up the rigging again. And well, we're working on the engine also. We modified the wiring system and verified that everything works properly. So we're getting there, but it's a substantial task. In the parlance of amateur built aircraft, we're about 95% done with about 90% to go. So I'm going to wrap that up now. And if there's any questions, happy to hear them.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you. It's a hot day and you're all there to show this exciting tour for us. So if any question, please, speak out or raise hand. Before that, I think, Gary, could you say again about your experience with the Tuskegee Airmen? I think you mentioned a little bit earlier. Can you a little bit more?
Yeah, certainly. As a matter of fact, I've got a couple of instances of work with the Tuskegee or of dealing with the Tuskegee Airmen. In about 2001, our team was located at the warehouse in Northrop Warehouse at the southwest side of Hawthorne Airport. And we would go over to the southeast side to Nate's Cafe after working on the plane each Saturday. And about 2 to 3 times, 1 to 3 times, 1 or 2 times a week, 1 or 2 times a month, there would be about 8 gentlemen from the Tuskegee Squadron in the area who would come and eat. We would offer the corner table to them, and we would split into a couple of different booths at that time. So I talked with a number of them at that time, and I'm sorry I don't know the names at this date. Secondly, when I started working with the Tomorrow's Aeronautical Museum in Compton, their theme is also the Tuskegee Airmen. All their aircraft have red tails. And there's a aircraft and power plant mechanic, Fernando Anaya, from American Airlines, and he is providing a practical A&P training program as we maintain the aircraft that are associated with the Compton Airport programs. So the Tomorrow's Aeronautical Museum offers students an opportunity to do homework at their facility or to use their computer facilities. There are a lot of flight training and FAA courses on those machines, and there's more than a few people using them for gaming. But the overall function is a very excellent STEM program. And the Fernando's program is basically separated from that at this time, but it's still friendly and associated. Thirdly, I'll mention that when I was in Civil Air Patrol in Vancouver, Washington, near Portland, I became cadet commander, and one of our members there, Larry English, who came in as a young, very thin kid with not a lot of self-confidence. In the course of about 2 years, he went through the program and exited and achieved what was called a certificate of proficiency. So when he graduated from high school, he went to he volunteered for the Air Force. And when he went to the Lackland Air Force Base basic training, he went in as an Airman Third. So the Civil Air Patrol training had provided him a leapfrog state into the Air Force. I went through that similar program, and in fact, I placed second in Oregon on a special tour. And the result was I went to the Vandenberg Air Force Base for a week of missile orientation, one of the most spectacular events in my early career. It also probably gave a long step up in a lot of other positions that I eventually arrived at. So that's a rather lengthy comment about my involvement with Tuskegee, and I'll mute myself and let you guys ask questions or whatever.
Thank you, Gary. This is very inspiring. You know, it's the same dream, the Tuskegee Airmen, and you love aviation as well. Your passion for the Wright Flyer and aviation is really admirable and very inspiring. Certainly will help the communities. So any question, comment? Victor, do you have any question, comments?
Oh, no, I don't have any questions. You guys good at this. Have to wrap it up. I'm about 2 hours ahead of you guys, so I'm running kind of late. But thanks for everybody for just participation in this talk about the Tuskegee Airmen and Juneteenth. And I'll try to, get on next time for more involvement. We just coming off this COVID-19 thing here, so we sort of 50-50 now, in work behind the computer. So we just making adjustments here. But yeah, it was a great session. I appreciate it, Ken.
Yeah, Victor is right. It's a very auspicious day today, Juneteenth, and we celebrate the holiday. And also we talk about this very inspiring, legendary Tuskegee Airmen. And Gary showed this fantastic Wright Flyer project. And that's the heart, of aviation. Is the origin of everything. It's the love for aviation, engineering, science, as Victor said. So it's really, really the heart of aerospace. Anyway, if no further question, and we'll post the video, so including Gary's field tour online, so more people will be able to watch it. And about Juneteenth, Tuskegee Airmen, or the Wright Flyer project, we'll forward to the speaker, panelists, and Mr. Moyer, for the question. So yeah, it's a hot day there. So Gary, so you should take some shade. So I think that's we are going to wrap up for the event.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you everybody for being here. It was a very fascinating program.
Yes, thank you, Gary. You added it's a fantastic field, amazing. Yeah, thank you, Randall. It's our great pleasure. Yeah, thank you, everyone. So thank you very much for attending today's event. So it's really exciting. So look forward to seeing you next time. Please join us and enjoy a great Saturday and have a great weekend, and happy Juneteenth. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.